My first claim is that suffering makes God's existence unlikely. Good work.
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Sage. Why don't you just begin? Why does suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, I guess, epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely, and that, you know, an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth.
I like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity, okay, because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by me. So I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
Can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Well, because the ultimate view here is that...
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet you. Good work.
Alex, my man.
How's it going? Nice to meet you too.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is, what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely on the condition that God exists?
I think that if God is all-loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to suffer. And so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on, horrendous, or whatever
in particular, non-human animal suffering? Because I think that the Christianity has a celebrated tradition of theodicies trying to explain why suffering exists.
Yeah.
Human free will, the development of the soul, higher order goods, all of this kind of stuff, none of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem?
I have not.
Okay, so philosophers of religion have started to understand that the thing that actually generates a problem between God and suffering is actually the value system you attach to the very attribute of perfect lovingness. Because the problem of evil is an internal critique, you have to look at a very specific version of theism and how it defines perfect lovingness. I want to present to you a version where my version of perfect lovingness does not actually constitute a problem and a misalignment, that mismatch between the suffering of animals, let's just say the profusion of suffering of animals, and the existence of God.
So let's hear it. What kind of God are we imagining that would allow and oversee and do nothing to prevent billions of years of untold animal suffering?
Right, so you're talking about non-prevention.
Or setting up the system that is natural selection such that it relies upon things like predation and disease.
Well, the first part is I don't agree with the whole setting up the system part. So I'm not one of those theists that believes that God does this select and pick idea of creating worlds. I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem anything. The first time, sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores?
Yes, he could totally do that.
Okay, so had he done that, here's an instant way to reduce by orders of magnitude the amount of suffering that exists.
Right, but hold on. That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting that has a problem with the evil. So I have to give you my value theory first for you to show that misalignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay, so my value theory says that it's not the most important thing about a sentient creature is not what merely happens to them. It's about the total timeline of their life and how and where their life permanently ends. Meaning, if you were to judge an author of a narrative, and the first few chapters, let's say, there's a lot of bad things happening, but the end ends with this crescendo where there's victoriousness, there's redemption, there's beauty, and everyone in the story actually endorses their entire existence that they live. They can look at their they can look at their total timeline, and they actually each subjectively come to the conclusion, I'm glad I was made, and I totally see what my suffering was for. That's the particular I'm using with. So we have to judge, hold on, like John Hicks says, we have to judge the very nature of God's lovingness by what he does in the end, not these few time slices that we observe right now. For you to show that there's a problem, you have to show to me that the suffering of animals cannot be transformed, are intrinsically cut off from being transformed into a life that they will endorse. There's a couple of theses on the table, but sure, go ahead.
Okay, so are you talking about the end of their life is in their end of life on Earth, or are you talking about the afterlife?
I'm antemortem, postmortem.
Because if you're just talking about life on Earth, then I would say that if you had an author writing a book and a character, if we were trying to figure out the relationship between that author and the person in the book, and that person in the book shows up for 5 seconds in the first chapter and is a child who almost immediately dies of cancer in an incredibly painful way, and there's no development, there's no sort of bringing back to life and suddenly everyone's grateful for it. It is just this miserable, tragic experience. And I ask, well, what did the author not want to do for the story of the book, but want to do for that character?
Yes.
I think it would be pretty damning. And also, when it comes to animals, we're talking about animals who are predated on from the moment that they begin existence.
Absolutely.
They sort of have disease. Zebras, when they're killed by lions, are often too big to be killed instantly. So they die over minutes with their windpipes caught in the jaws of a lion. How can this be developing a zebra, which, by the way, probably doesn't even have the same kind of first-person conscious experience that humans do in order to sort of rationalize and abstract and learn from their sort of past and morally develop in that way? They just suffer. And what kind of God could oversee this?
Okay, so there's a lot of assumptions on the table again. Again, you're assuming a particular value system that I'm not laying
I'll tell you what
out.
I'm assuming here. What I'm assuming here is that a good God would not allow unnecessary suffering to obtain.
Okay, gotcha. So we can
Do you agree with that?
We can talk about unnecessary suffering. We're talking about the justifying norms for suffering. You're saying it has to be in terms of necessity, which is an evil is only authorizable by God if it's in connection to a greater good or prevention of a greater evil, correct?
If there's some kind of justification for allowing that suffering.
Yeah, but you're saying it's a necessary connection. What's the term of necessity?
So perhaps I should say unjustified instead of unnecessary.
Okay, so we both agree. I do not believe that God can authorize justified, unjustified suffering.
Tell me how that example that I gave you, the deer with its leg starving, is justified.
Because it's intrinsically redeemable, and the norms I'm working with is not this necessity condition that you're working with. Mine is about redeemable suffering, redeemability, or we call it defeasibility. If that suffering can be defeated within the creature's life, and I'll define what I mean by defeat, which is that they can retroactively look back at what they went through and integrate it into their life history, where they look at their life.
I have to interrupt because the example I gave you is one where the deer dies.
Yes, the deer dies. But here's the thing. You're probably talking about this post-mortem example. Sure. I'm going to put one thesis on the table. There's two philosophers that defend exactly what this goes through. One defends that animals will be given a martyrdom status, while God will be able to present himself in a way to animals in the afterlife, such that in the same way you could give praise to a dog, and the dog emotionally recognizes that he's loved and that his life is worth living, right? To these animals that suffered like that, there's one view on the table, which is that God will give them a praiseworthy status where they will be able to actually see that.
Can we talk about that claim? Because these animals are suffering for what? I mean, God might cause them to suffer a bunch.
It's not means to ends. This is not means to ends.
God might cause them to suffer a bunch and then essentially redeem them in the afterlife. But what for? Like, why do this? If I were to punch you in the face and then give you $20,000 afterwards, you might be grateful for the $20,000. Yeah. But why couldn't I just give you the $20,000?
Well, see, so that's assuming. So I saw your debate with Trent.
You've been voted out by the majority.
Awesome,
Please
man.
return to your seat.
Two things. Have you heard of the Cloud Rider motif?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, the Cloud Rider motif.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'm assuming you've heard of like the two powers in heaven motif.
No.
Okay. There's a Jewish historian named Alan Segal. He wrote a book called The Two Powers in Heaven. And what he talks about is there's this weird thing happening in the Hebrew Bible where there's almost like two Yahweh figures that they point to. So some verses, for instance, will say like Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh. And so Philo of Alexandria in the Second Temple period talks about this two powers in heaven motif. And he says like there's two Yahwehs. There's the first power and the second power, but they're both Yahweh. It's almost like a sort of proto-Trinitarian view. That's one thing that I'll just kind of put there for now. Another puzzle piece here is you've heard about the cloud rider motif. So in the Ugaritic texts, in the Baal cycle, we see Baal referenced as the one who rides the clouds. And I think you can see that actually adopted by the Israelites in the Hebrew Bible as well. So Psalm 104 is like an exaltation psalm and actually talks about Yahweh being the one that rides the clouds in heaven. He is the king. I see that as kind of a polemic of calling Yahweh the king over Baal. Are we on the same page there?
Sure.
Okay. Into Daniel 7, you'll see a messianic passage there about how God will come down, and you'll see the Son of Man come, riding in the clouds of heaven, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom.
Do you think Daniel thought that the Son of Man was going to be God, since he says that he's riding on a cloud?
This is a really interesting point.
I don't think that he did, because he was a Jewish writer.
I lean on saying yes, but I don't know if I can say that with like absolute certainty.
The prophet Daniel was expecting the Messiah to be God.
I think so.
Oh, sorry, the Son of Man to be God.
That's a motif only applied to God. So you have this cloud rider motif and the human
by the way, I do think that there are multiple things which people, even in Jesus' time, thought only God could do. Things like forgiving sins. And when Jesus does these things, he's not doing so in order to prove that he's God, but in order to prove that the Son of Man has the authority to do that too.
Yeah, I completely agree. This isn't that kind of an argument. This is an identification thing.
So where's Jesus claiming to be God?
Yes, that's where I'm going. So we have these puzzle pieces in place.
Sure.
If you fast forward to Mark's gospel, and I'm going to use Mark.
Let's do Mark.
Jesus before Caiaphas in Mark's gospel, Caiaphas asks him, "Who are you?" And instead of just explicitly saying, "I am God," Jesus quotes Daniel 7, saying he is the Son of Man, the human one, who will ride on the clouds, and calls himself the second power. So you have this two powers in heaven motif. The two powers, they're both God, and the cloud rider motif, and the Son of Man. He's quoting Daniel 7 to identify himself. After that, Caiaphas tears his robe and cries blasphemy.
I do think that Jesus is making some pretty extraordinary claims of himself, such as being the Son of Man, but I still don't see why he's claiming to be God. If this were the way that he was trying to reveal his divinity to people, it'd be a strange and convoluted way to do it. Psalm 82 also talks about God presiding over a council of gods, saying, "You shall be called gods."
I think there's a mistake here.
And Jesus quotes that psalm when he's referring to his relationship with the Father
I understand what you're
in the
saying.
Gospel of John. So even if in the Old Testament you have these
two
sort of
hypotheses,
lesser
though,
gods,
right?
Jesus is only
your
claiming to be that.
hypothesis, right? That this is not a Christological implication, and I have mine. And I get what you're saying, where you're coming from, but to the ancient author, how obvious would this be?
So the best we have here is Jesus claiming to be the Son of Man, and that might indicate that he might be God.
Yeah, well, we don't predicate our hypotheses on the evidence we wish we did have. We go off the evidence that we do have.
That's right, and I don't think that there's any point at which Jesus says,
so you're saying
"I am
that
God."
this is not
All
evidence.
right, guys, that's time.
Evidence, but not good enough. Hey, so nice to meet you. Sorry we haven't got more time. I wish we could. This chap over here just seems also very knowledgeable, very enthusiastic, and philosophically minded as well. Why don't we bring you back?
So, my claim, which might bother some people in this circle, and this is why I thought maybe we could find a little bit of middle ground
how we
here.
like it.
Because I represent a form of Christianity that a lot of people don't even consider as Christian. I'm a Latter-day Saint, also known as a Mormon.
Awesome.
And my claim is that the restored gospel, also known as Mormonism, provides a conception of God that is more rationally defensible than any other creedal Christian sect.
Okay. Tell me why. I must admit, I don't know very much about Mormon theology. I know you also don't like being called Mormons, right? So I don't quite know what term to use.
We generally are known.
Latter-day Saints.
Latter-day Saints, the church, a member of the Church of
theology,
Jesus
let's
Christ.
say.
Yes. Our theological claims, for example, the problem of evil. Okay, so the way that we address it. So the problem really, so far as I can tell, that you have isn't so much with suffering, right? Because suffering could be something that is justifiable, right?
Yeah, in principle. It's sort of the amount of suffering, the depth of suffering.
Absolutely. So the issue really is injustice. It's
not injustice. It's suffering, and particularly suffering of non-human animals.
Okay, and fair enough. So with the concept of injustice, the Latter-day Saint conception of God is that God actually, his purpose is to make us become as he is.
Yes. Does that include animals as well?
Animals are part of the created order that will be redeemed along with the rest of the created order.
Okay, so what does suffering do for them?
Suffering is part of the inherent nature of the world as a fallen world, okay?
Even for animals?
Yes, even for animals.
Whose fault is that?
Let me break
Sorry,
it down.
I'm throwing
this
a lot
way.
of questions.
Yeah, let me break it down like this.
Sure.
So if I have a child
Yeah.
and I want my child to grow up to become like me, my child needs to go out of my house.
Yep.
He needs to go into the lone and dreary world. And if that is the case, that means that there's going to be some level of separation between me and him. He's in the world of injustice. It's a world that is unfair.
Why is that world unjust and unfair? Because I understand what you're saying. In this analogy, you want your child to become like you. And what that's going to involve is encountering suffering, developing as a person, getting thicker skin. But the only reason that you want that for your child is because they're going to live in a world where they're going to have to encounter that, and you want them to be better at dealing with that, right? If you were given the opportunity to give your child a life that was separate from you, where they went about and did their business, but there wasn't that kind of suffering, and you chose the one in which there was suffering just for the sake of it, I think that would be problematic.
Well, it's not that I chose to put them in that world. See, this is a difference in Latter-day Saint theology.
Sure, that's what I'm interested in.
In Latter-day Saint theology, there is a pre-existence, and human beings, knowing the unjust nature of reality, have the choice.
Oh, they choose to,
They choose to enter into the mortal state, to pass through. The way to look at it is there's this realm of injustice where anything can happen. I can go out tomorrow, my kid can get cancer, all these things can happen. And the idea is we say, but if you're willing to pass through the realm of injustice, this is a necessary condition to reach your divine potential.
How come? Why is it necessary?
This is another thing about Latter-day Saint theology that's different. Like, for instance, God cannot create a square circle.
Why does that apply here? I mean, why
Because,
can't he do that?
because God cannot bring you to your divine potential because of the nature of the laws of reality.
Okay, but like, why not? Because you're just sort of restating that he can't do it. I want to know why.
I know what I'm saying is that there are laws that even God is bound by.
Like, which laws are relevant here? Like, which laws is
Like the law of
God-
non-contradiction, for instance.
Explain to me how the law of non-contradiction binds God to not create a world where there's no suffering.
Because that relationship with God must be freely chosen, and God cannot force me. Because there is the question, why doesn't God just make us all
Okay,
happy
but that's
all
a
the time
separate question
forever?
because God could make a world in which there's no suffering, in which you're still
I disagree.
in which you're still free to choose whether or not to follow Him.
I would say that that is a logical contradiction.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me why. Because right now what you're telling me is that it's illogical on the level of creating a square circle to create a system that a person can voluntarily choose to sort of exit the heavenly realm and go into in order to do whatever they need to do to get to God's ultimate
Not to
potential.
get
for
to
them.
God, to become as He is.
Sure, to fulfill their full potential that has to involve not just suffering, but the kind of suffering that we see on planet Earth. I'm asking why that's logically necessary.
A totally unjust world,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Because it is by passing through this realm that we have the experience of injustice that allows us to know what injustice is.
But why do we need to know what injustice is?
Because how else can you come to be like God? Kind of like the Adam and Eve story. There's the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil.
So what is justice? How do you define justice?
Off the top of my head, I would say that justice is getting what you deserve.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so the problem is that, like, you can imagine a situation in which there was nothing wrong, nothing bad, nothing evil, and therefore no need for this rectifying force of justice. It's a little.
No.
We say justice is a good thing, but justice is a good thing insofar.
Can you know-
Hold on.
well-
Justice is a good thing insofar as it overcomes injustice. That's what it's there for. In the same way that chemotherapy is a good thing because it tries to overcome cancer. If I said that I was going to create cancer so that we could have the good of chemotherapy, and you said, why would you do that? And I said, because there's no way for us to
No,
achieve the
it's-
good of chemotherapy without creating cancer, you'd look at me like I'd lost my mind.
No, it's like saying, this is the better analogy. It's like saying to my son, the only way that you can become the way I am is to go out into that world where anything could happen and to persevere.
Okay, so I still have a qualm with this, but for the sake of time, I want to ask you about animals. Do animals consent to go into this?
The animal kingdom is part of the fallen world. They are part of the fallen order.
Do they feel pain?
I don't know. That's more of a good question. I don't know necessarily where
What's
they
your
fit within
confidence
the-
level? Like, if I started strangling a dog in front of you, would you stop me?
Yeah, I think that I have an obligation to prevent the death of living creatures.
Not death. No, I'm not going to kill it. I'm going to
Well,
sort
even to
of
prevent the
Deadpool
suffering
style
of an
keep it
animal.
alive just
Yeah.
so it can suffer more.
Yeah,
Will
sure.
you stop me from doing that?
Yeah,
Right, why?
because I believe that God wants us to protect the created order.
Okay, so
and to create goodness, light, and truth.
So
in
would
the
that
world.
be similar to, like, you know, me stepping on a plant or something? You're just like, hey, don't do that, man. It's the created
No,
order.
you could
Or do you
say
think
that-
it's because they're suffering?
Yeah, I think it is probably because they're suffering, but I don't understand that suffering in terms of the way that humans suffer.
Okay, because you said that the reason why it's not so much of a problem for humans to enter the Vale of Tears and have to suffer is because they consent to do so before they're born. If animals don't do that, then I don't think that their suffering is justified on the same grounds.
Well, let me turn this around, because while I think that you bring up some objections there, my claim is that we have a better capacity to handle this than the creedal Christian model.
Sure. Okay.
So would you agree with my claim that we have a better model than creedal Christianity?
I don't know, because I don't know enough, because we've only been speaking for 10 minutes. There are probably things that it deals with better and things that it deals with worse. For example, I've spoken a ton on my show about the Gnostic cosmology, which I think does a lot to do away with problems like the problem of evil and the weird sort of seeming immateriality of Jesus in some passages and stuff. But there's a lot of problems with it too. There's a ton of problems, such as like God's providence and the nature of why the demiurge is created. All of these ideas are oftentimes, I think, created because they better account for certain things over others. I don't think that's necessarily the case with Mormonism, of course. But yeah, I'm sure in some cases it does better, in some cases it does worse. In this case, I don't think it does anything more to explain the suffering of animals.
Your problem with the suffering of animals is that it's unjust.
No, it's not.
Then
it's
why
not.
do you? Then what? Suffering. If suffering ultimately is redeemed, let's say the animals on the other side, for all they suffer, they get the best possible animal future that you could ever imagine, and the animals get there and they go, "This is great. It was all worth it."
Yeah. Then the question is,
then it would be worth it. So it's the injustice of it.
The question is, why aren't they just given that without the suffering first? I can understand why that wouldn't happen with humans for whatever. Again, I want to clarify, I still have qualms with your idea, but let me just grant it for a moment. I can understand why you need to do that with humans before they get the nice reward at the end. But why the animals? Why cause them to suffer?
Human beings will suffer as well, unjustly. It's just the nature of an unjust world.
The suffering of animals, I think, is unexpected if a good God is overseeing.
But it's not a problem if ultimately they are compensated for
I think it still is a problem, because you don't just get to inflict suffering and then compensate people and think that that's okay. Have you heard of the Bullingdon Club? It's a club.
No, if I have to inflict suffering on here.
Wait a second. Let me give you this example. Let me give you this example. There's an infamous club, a private members club at Oxford University called the Bullingdon Club. They're a bunch of like Etonites, posh kids who used to go around. They'd go to restaurants. They were incredibly rich. They would host a dinner, and then they would trash the place. They'd flip over tables, they'd smash things, they'd cover the walls and everything. It was absolutely devastating, just horrible behavior. And then when the owner came up and said, "What the hell have you done?" they just paid them off. They said, "Hey, have a bunch of money." And not only that, they paid them way more than the repairs are worth. So they could get away with it, because if anything, they've done those people a favor. No, it's still terrible, awful behavior, because even if you've compensated someone for it, if you've caused them for suffering, which, by the way, still hasn't been explained why that suffering exists,
30 seconds.
It doesn't seem like it's worth it.
Let me do this.
Or if it's not worth it, it doesn't seem like it's justifiable.
It can be worth it, though. For instance, a dog that's getting a shot has no idea what's going on. He's just thinking, this hurts and is so terrible. And the thing is if it ultimately saves its life, it's worth it.
Yeah, but imagine if you had the
there is a compensatory reward for the suffering that's there, everything can be redeemed.
I understand what you're saying.
And in your view, is life even worth it? Because if life is mostly suffering, even for the animals, then isn't the logical conclusion to end this project altogether?
That's a separate question. But if you had the opportunity to not have that dog need the shot, and you gave them the shot anyway, you created the need for the shot, and then gave them the shot and caused them to suffer.
But in
you didn't need to
LDS
give them the need for it in the first
cosmology,
place.
God does not create the conditions that are where the shot is necessary.
That's
you're
what we need to
correct,
explore.
and you're correct on creedal Christianity. It does, and that's the biggest flaw with it. By the way, I want to give you. That's just. Well, hey,
Hey, thanks.
Alex. It's been great to meet you, man.
Likewise.
Take care.
Yeah, see you later.